I just put mine on flight mode. No. Good. Listen, good. This is we won our standards, you know.
Shane reckons that the northern, you would know this, Ronan, he reckons that the northern Tato crisps are better than the southern Tato crisps, which I told him is absolutely mad.
No, that's a non-position, I would say.
He said, I think I'm in a minority. I was like, I think you're the one.
Yeah, I think that's the only person I've ever heard say that. Which is an extreme minority, I would say.
All right, Paul, I think we're generally good. Welcome, everybody. Conan here in studio. Conan, hello.
Hi, Joe.
And a warm welcome. He has joined the team. We are expanding in numbers. Not a minute too soon. Ronan Mullen in the building. Hello, Ronan.
Hi, Joe. Good to see you again.
Hey.
You put me on the back foot there where I almost commandeered Conan's chair. So I feel very much like the newcomer.
It's fit to sit in your chair. I didn't know how you'd feel about that. I said I wouldn't if I was you.
Yeah, I think after day 3 and day 4, I think I had cemented this chair.
I think so. Yeah. I think so. We settle into our routines very quickly. Ronan tried to pull a Heimer Hallgrimsson on me this morning. He said, I'll probably just be here in an observational capacity today. I said, you bloody won't.
We've got a lot of emails, a lot of issues that you need to fix for us now, Ronan.
I was trying to get John O'Shea to sit in here, but he's otherwise engaged.
No. Come in, say hello to everybody. No pressure. This is kind of just a round the houses, any other business kind of a podcast, if you're wondering. I suspect we may start doing more of these. So there's no guest as such. We're just going to bring you up to speed on what's going on in the world of sport generally. We have a few emails. I was watching something very good on Amazon Prime last night I wanted to mention to you. And that's kind of the gist, really. Happy to say in our other podcast today, which you'll also see in our feed, will be a conversation with Gunter Steiner. He of Team Haas Formula 1 Drive to Survive, which we're really looking forward to. We've about 20 minutes with him. It's not going to be, your life and times, but it'll be enough to have a bit of chat with Gunter, who's generally the best thing to have come out of Drive to Survive is the consensus. We would never have known him. I mean, it's a funny thing when you think of his life. He would have been such a Team Haas, nobody, no great results, no great standings, and yet now he's like top 2, 3, 4 faces of the entire sport.
And like we had spoken about before, we never would have thought that our lives would be reflected in the lives of Formula 1 stars and in this world. So thank you, Gunter.
Yeah, so he's on the way. Ronan, by the way, will bring so much to the podcast, not to talk about you like you're not here. But even just this morning, Conan, he turned to me and he said, the rule changes, Jim Gavin's business, you covered it. We could do something next week maybe on the most consequential rule changes in sport in history, things like the three-pointer in basketball and others. And I thought, good to have you back, buddy.
Yeah, because I saw an interesting graphic on Reddit there. It's the 3-point arc and how it changed the percentage shots of 2-pointers versus 3-pointers. So obviously under the basket was the predominant area where people got their scores, and now it's the opposite. So you're kind of, as most like basketball fans will know, you're incentivized to shoot from behind the 3-point arc. So it'll be interesting to see. We won't have the data for a while if these changes do come through, the extent to which it does lead to teams taking more, going for that 2-point shot or the goal. And as we all know, the most dangerous pass in Gaelic football is the miss-hit shot. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a lot of...
Yeah. No, I'm sure there is a long-range Steph Curry of GA out there now who's 17, 18, about to be born and revolutionise things. It's very possible.
I love that one morning in and Ronan's knocked some serious structure into this and we spent 10 days trying to name a Monday show.
Yes. Yeah, we won't bore you with that situation.
You missed a lot, Ronan.
Yeah. So here's what is generally going on. I would say it's quite enough news day. We'll come on to Heimer Hallgrimsson in Ireland, who trained this morning, unusually, a match day -1 morning session as opposed to training at the ground the night before the game. We will touch on Caoimhín Kelleher, who, we're not wishing ill on Alisson or stabbing the voodoo doll, but good news for him. But first, Jurgen Klopp, back in football, was the headline, and everybody thought, oh my God, I knew it, he couldn't stay away. It's not quite back in management. So Jurgen Klopp is head of global soccer at Red Bull. He seems to have a get-out clause as well. Widely reported, he does have a get-out clause, which will allow him to apply for the German national team once Julian Nagelsmann steps down. Nagelsmann will obviously be there for the World Cup in 26, barring disaster next year. So Klopp has said, I see my role primarily as a mentor for the coaches and management of Red Bull clubs. So he's back involved. Kind of an interesting choice for such a exceptionally popular person in Germany to hitch his wagon to Red Bull and all of that entails. Deeply unpopular in German football. I was reminding myself of the Red Bull extravaganza in sport. There's a great piece in the New York Times by Nancy Froston, if you're interested, why Red Bull bought sports teams and the impact on them. And so it's 20 years next year since they first went into football and bought Salzburg. So it's really kind of entrenched now. They own at present RB Salzburg, RB Leipzig in Germany, New York Red Bulls. As of this summer, they have a minority share in Leeds. They have a team in Brazil, Formula One team, obviously, and lots of other kind of extreme action sports. And even, it was kind of striking when they bought a stake in Leeds, which was their first foray into English football. The chairman, Parag Marate, had to come out to absolutely reassure everybody the club is not going to be called Leeds Red Bulls. But obviously that was the fear. Red Bull are the third most valuable soft drinks company in the world. They're number 3. Care to guess who number 1 is?
Well, it has to be Coca-Cola, no?
By a gazillion miles.
Yeah.
Care to guess who number 2 is?
Ooh.
Pepsi?
By quite a lot as well.
Really? Yeah, I was wondering, had they fallen off?
No. Coca-Cola is double the value of Pepsi, but Pepsi is 3 times the value of Red Bull. And then with Red Bull, they're part of like a pack.
Yeah.
There's not much difference between Red Bull and Monster in 4th.
That was going to be my Pepsi guess. But yeah.
4th in the world?
In the world, Monster. You'll never guess 5th.
Everywhere.
It'll make sense when you're here.
Iron Brew.
Nescafe. Gatorade, Dr. Pepper. That's the order, if you're interested in these things. So obviously for Red Bull, this was a branding exercise, and it's part of the vibe of the company. They will generally change the name of the team, the kit, the shirt sponsor. 3 of their 4 home grounds are called Red Bull Arena. So there's no subtlety here, but it's striking. And in the piece in the New York Times, the point is made. It's also very lucrative. The New York Red Bulls, for instance, in 2006 cost 15 million sterling. They're now worth hundreds of millions. So 1, you get the branding exercise, but 2, you get an asset which appreciates very dramatically. So they're making money in a big way. I was reminding myself of the football situation then. So RB Salzburg, where Pep Linders is currently manager. So it's all so incestuous, isn't it? So he hasn't had a good start to the season, by the way. 2 Champions League defeats and 5-0 hammering in the league. But Red Bull moved in and bought Salzburg in 2005. Fans apoplectic. There were protests. They changed the team colours, the name of the team, the stadium. This was sacrilege in European football. Unthinkable that it could happen. And over time, because they've actually, it seems, done such a good job, they're incredibly well run. Ticket prices are low. Ralf Rangnick did an extraordinary job. They won 10 league titles in a row. They reached the semi-final of the Europa League in 2018. This is a kind of this is acceptable-ish. Germany in Leipzig, where Klopp, I guess, will spend some time for sure. Far less popular. They have the 50+1 rule, fan ownership, that is sacred. There's a deep suspicion of commercialism and football. There's a kind of a version of football that nobody wants, and they felt that Red Bull very much represented that. So, but right across the league, not least in Leipzig, where fans started their own team. They're now up to the 3rd division, that team. They've no home ground, but they're making their way slowly. But like a bunch of fans went up and set up their own team in Leipzig. But, Dortmund fans boycott trips to the Red Bull Arena. And they've circumvented the 50+1 rules really by just making it really, really expensive for fans to buy in to the club. Like, I think it's like many multiples of trying to buy voting shares in Bayern Munich. It's the most expensive voting ticket in town, and so basically nobody has voting rights. It is run by Red Bull. So it was cynical, but they got around the rules that way. And even things like the rule in Germany was, well, you're not calling them Red Bull.
Yeah.
So they Rasenballsport. So it's like, I think the rough translation is like lawn sport football, but they're RB Leipzig. So, even that left a bad-ish taste. So that's where Red Bull are now. It seems to be like an extraordinary success, and I would say very much hated in Germany. Generally, this multi-club ownership thing, not liked by most, but as with most things, we're just sort of we get broken in by it all, and it's just normal, and now it's 20 years later, and it's like the done thing. So that's Jurgen Klopp's new home, which is an interesting choice for him.
Yeah, it's funny, like the Dortmund point, because they've obviously lost a bit of the moral high ground, or their fans, given the Rheinmetall situation and what went with that.
Ryan, remind me of that.
So basically an arms supplier, and it happened just before the Champions League final, when all the goodwill in the world was going towards Dortmund to beat Real Madrid. And then this happened the week of that, and just kind of an acceptance of the sponsorship and how that all coincided. But yeah, very much with that war in the backdrop and the extent to which it was prevailing.
Yeah, it rings a bell now.
Yeah, no, but it was just specifically on the Red Bull thing seemed to take a back seat in that context, where that had been so prevalent for such a long time that Dortmund became the new bad boys in town, and it's like they're the ones that were kind of boycotting. So Red Bull are probably like happy days.
Yes.
And equally, Jurgen Klopp, I can't profess to know how beloved he is in Germany.
He's like right up there.
Yeah, because he had
there's not an ad campaign that he's not on.
Yeah, because he had obviously a preceding TV career where he was like the popular pundit of the day, and then given the rivalries and they're so set out that I can understand whether there probably is portions of Germany that don't like him to begin with, but this kind of puts him in an interesting position where he is taking a job where there is going to be a little bit of baggage, I should say.
Definitely.
And also, not to be too divergent on a totally different point, but his personality type doesn't seem to fit the job description, where like the way he stepped away from the Liverpool job was given to the extent to which he's an all or nothing type personality, and this seems very much you're at a remove, you're observing everything, whereas he seems very much like the on the grass touchline manager. So I don't know. I think nothing about this seems to be a natural fit as far as I'm concerned.
It's a strange one because of the baggage that Ronan mentions and the rivalry as well that you're touching on there between Leipzig and Dortmund, and how loved Klopp is by Dortmund. I mean, imagine he took over, he took this advisory role of the Man City group, where he was now looking after Melbourne, New York, Man City as well. That would just be...
Great story.
Yeah, exactly. And Liverpool fans would be like, whoa, what?
Yeah.
That's the same thing in Germany now as well. So, and then obviously you have the other side of it. Klopp has been somebody who's demonstrated such a great social conscience before in the past. He's such a romantic about football.
Yes, it's the antithesis of romance.
Yeah. He spoke so strongly, so well about Roman Abramovich, about the Saudi takeover of Newcastle. I remember he said something, society has failed. Nobody said anything, and he was including himself in that society has failed. And maybe this is him just going along with it, and maybe he's just decided, you know what, this is a good gig. But the other thing that I think about from all this is that he's still too good a manager to be taking a role like this. I mean, literally his assistant in his last job is in charge of probably the biggest entity of this group.
I mean, the fact that the German national team clause has been so widely reported, it now almost feels like a fait accompli that he'll just take over after 2026.
Yeah.
And this is almost just like a nice earner in the meantime vibes,
But what if Linders isn't doing well? Obviously, there's awkwardness there. The Klopp has to be the one to...
Yeah.
I wonder is Pep Linders like, oh, jeez, are you serious?
But also the whole
This
time...
guy,
then,
I thought I was gone.
Yeah, they'll be sitting around in these group meetings like, that's not going well. Is there anybody we can think of that could come in and troubleshoot this? And Jurgen Klopp is sitting like... Do you imagine you took an advisory role here, podcast across the Irish Independent, and you weren't presenting, and it wasn't going well, and we needed a really good presenter? It's like, who can we think of here?
I appreciate you likening me to Jurgen Klopp. That's not OTT at all.
Likening myself to Linders as well, unfortunately.
So that's Jurgen Klopp this morning. We have Caoimhín Kelleher in line for extended run in the first team. Liverpool confirmed that Alisson faces 6 weeks out with hamstring injury against Crystal Palace. Happened a similar time the other season. It was just post an international break, give or take. So that's his second hamstring problem of the season, Alisson. Liverpool might be looking here and going, is there the beginnings of an injury profile where he misses chunks of seasons? Who knows? But I guess for Kelleher, that kind of thing, you take what you can get, and that's good, and it did him no harm last year. So he'll be in. Hal Grimson and Ireland trained this morning. Never come across this before, so they're training first thing this morning instead of usually match day -1 is evening at the training at the football ground. So they were at the football ground. Aidan Fitzmaurice's piece today pointing out kickoff time is 9:45 local time. They are 2 hours ahead of us, and this is a common problem in Finland for these midweek games. it's stupidly late, and therefore the game is not a sellout. They play England at the weekend. That very much is a sellout. Finland against Ireland, not quite grabbing the locals. So I have a curious atmosphere maybe to be anticipated at this game on Thursday. Hal Grimson gave his press conference. He's talking about undoing the, quote, downward spiral that we're in. Which is like, oh shit, really? Okay, they're all the headlines. The squad, and this is where I think you have to be really fair to Hal Grimson. The nature of international management, they've had one training session ahead of the training session at the ground this morning, which again is only going to be so thorough given that it's the day before a game. But he's talking about the fact they've had 5 meetings already for their one training session. Honestly, I feel much better in this camp, both on the meetings and the sessions. There's a higher tempo in what we're doing. And he reckons that means they're starting to get to grips with what he's asking of them. Here is a clip of Hal Grimson at the press conference this morning. So he was just asked any comparisons, parallels between taking over Iceland and taking over Ireland.
Starting from a low point, I would say, in both projects, trying to build a structure, which is really important in a national team, not taking it a game by game, but building something together from one game to another, trying to build on what we did last time, etc. I think that is really important. Said so many times that it's so different to be a national team coach. For example, if you just take this camp, and it will be the same next camp. Players play on Sunday, they come, they cannot train on Monday. So yesterday was probably the only real training session we can have. So that's the only time we have all the players and they are physically ready to do a training session. So it's tough to be a coach and have only one training session. So we just need to have everything ready on what we did last time and try to build on that one, because the players will then go to their clubs and do something totally different for a month. And then next time they will come, we will again have one training session. So we just need to be ready and clear on what we want, not to overload the players with information, just keep on building and then slowly, camp by camp, improving what we are doing.
We had a great chat with Dan McDonnell and Dion Fanning in studio yesterday about all things Hal Grimson and just where Irish football is. I'd recommend it. Your initial impressions, Ronan, of HH?
Yeah, well, you've kind of touched on it there. With the nature of international management, it's actually no reflection on him specifically, but you don't have a very long time to get a grasp of things and go through the minutiae of it on the training ground. So I really do think you need that force of personality. And he does seem to have a bit of personality, but seemed to get off on the wrong foot with the whole assignment or otherwise of duties, and just there was no sense that I'm taking this and I'm dragging it forward. And Stephen Kenny, for all that, it didn't pan out as some people had hoped, he had a vision and he was very clear about that from the get-go. I just don't really get a sense yet of HH and what he's trying to do, and maybe we'll have more of a sense of that after this weekend. The sort of benefit of the doubt that I'm giving him there and how quickly he was thrown in the deep end, that dissipates as the matches go by, and I'd like to have more of a sense by the end of this window of what he's going to try and achieve with this team.
Yeah, we touched on it yesterday with the two boys. I feel a bit sorry for him. The process has tainted his appointment a little bit. There's a really deep frustration. People are just so fed up with everything, all things Irish football. His second game against Greece, Irish fans booed at the end of the game. It's the shortest honeymoon in history. I think there's a real sense of Heimer, let's see what you can do. But I mean, we're Thursday to go badly and then Sunday to go badly. I think people would already be fed up of him and kind of thinking, well, we're counting down till you're gone. And it's really tough on him, I think.
People definitely want some sort of short-term hit, don't they? I think we all need it, and we've sort of...
Some Red Bull, some Monster, some Gatorade.
There is obviously so much apathy around the thing as well, so the longer it goes on without a result of any kind of note, then people are just so trigger-happy with... Especially when someone comes in and they're just like, yeah, look, this isn't really... Haven't got my feet under the table just yet. I mean, there's only so long you can do that in a new workplace, and not just speaking indirectly here about Ronan. But, that's the sort of feeling he gave off. And I wonder, maybe looking back, was he thinking, oh, it's England and Greece. Maybe for this camp, I'll just say him hands off. And because I do get the sense that he is a bit more, a bit more in charge of this camp.
Yeah, same. And I don't think it was totally unreasonable to kind of have, listen, I'll just watch how we do things a little bit first game. That said, if someone was to say, hang on, he had several months to get to know all the players, he should have hit the ground running, it needed it. I couldn't really argue with that. That would have been ideal for sure. I'm just saying it's not totally unreasonable that he didn't want to do that. But I think he underestimated the fact that we had gone through these, what felt like very important friendlies with interim management. So like we were fairly fed up of like, well, just hang on now, we'll ease our way into it. We were kind of like, geez, we've been waiting for a manager for so long, and now that you've started, you're still not starting. So I think all of these things have maybe contrived against him. The only other comments of note maybe out of Helsinki this morning, Nathan Collins, who's going to be captain in Seamus Coleman's absence, he is conceding that we are missing a few of the older boys, past leaders. There's been a kind of theme of leadership put to him. And it's time for boys to step up, start showing their leadership. It's been a very positive week. We've had a lot of meetings, so the meetings thing. We've had to, it's part and parcel of international football. I suspect we'll revisit that game in some shape or form tomorrow. Just before I get to a few emails, Amazon Prime, I got hooked in with an old free trial, signed up. I put the reminder in my calendar to delete, which I'm sure I'll forget to do. But so I went in because I know that date is approaching, just to see what they had on. Four Kings, I'm giving it the old thumbs up. I'm 2 episodes in. So this is about an era of British boxing that we all lived through, but were too young to fully get on board with. The Four Kings being Frank Bruno, Nigel Benn, Chris Eubank, Lennox Lewis, and how Bruno and Lennox Lewis intertwined in the heavyweight division and Benn and Eubank in the middleweight division. Just to give you a little flavour. So they've got the four of them back. They're all doing interviews separately, it must be said, but good interviews intermingled with brilliant nostalgic archive footage. So here's a sense of the trailer.
If I am world champion, then how can I not be crazy? Because a normal mind can't do it.
It's metaphor, right?
The biggest week in boxing.
Tonight, history is to be made.
You had 2 heavyweights, 2 middleweights. We have never seen black athletes grabbing the headlines like this. It was insane.
A lot of people like me in England.
Yeah, I would say I've got a big ego. I've really got a big ego. I was not just odd, I was on a different planet. To you, it looks like a sport. This isn't a sport. Some of us lose our lives.
That's a little taster of Four Kings. Really good. I have to say, I'd recommend it to people out there. And you heard Johnny Nelson there talk about we'd never seen black athletes dominate the headlines like this. So it's not kind of told through the prism of race at all, but that's a kind of significant aspect to the story, which I was too young to appreciate at the time, and they set the context so well. So you think in the 1980s, Frank Bruno is basically the most popular sportsman in the UK, give or take. You know, he goes over to the States and has a brawl with Tyson and loses, but arrives home to just euphoria. He's so beloved, and obviously his personality is kind of endearing. But so that's the 80s. But in 1980, Ronan, I know you'd know about this, but I hadn't remembered or forgot, hadn't appreciated. There's a middleweight title fight where England's Alan Minter is taking on Marvin Hagler in Wembley. This is 1980. So Bruno's just about to emerge, and it's for the middleweight title. Minter is the champion and Hagler is the challenger. And like the build up to the fight is disgusting. Minter is saying things like he didn't intend to lose his title to a black man.
Wow.
Yeah. And promptly does lose his title. Yeah, and then suddenly Wembley Stadium just starts lobbing beer cans and all sorts of things at Hagler in the ring when he's just won the world championship, and he's like, escorted out of the ring. There's a pile of bodies on top of him to try and get him out, and a big kind of riot practically kicks off. So that's the context through which Bruno suddenly walks in the door and everybody loves him, and then follows Ben, who's he's called the Dark Destroyer. I'm not sure that nickname would be given necessarily today, but he is. But like his brother was murdered. He was pushed through pane of glass by Ben says in the documentary, by a bunch of racists. He feels it was a racial murder. Who his brother was 17 at the time, and he cut his groin in the glass and bled to death. So he's got all of this anger. So that's Ben, and then you got Eubank, parents, Windrush generation, tries to become the quintessential English gentleman. You don't need to be Freud to work out something's going on there. And then you've Lennox Lewis, who's a Canadian gold medalist at the Olympics, and sees a gap in the market as Bruno's on the wane and goes and stands in front of lots of Union Jacks and says, I'm English, and they just don't really buy it. And that's the kind of cocktail. I'm only 2 episodes in, so that's kind of where I was with it. But it's good, really, really good. It was a hell of an era as well.
Yeah, and there's just so much stuff spinning out of that. I'd be interested to see when I do watch it, like the extent to which they can capture all of that, because even now that era is definitive of so many different elements of modern boxing. Like everything Anthony Joshua does is commented upon and looked through the prism of what Lennox Lewis makes of it, because he was so transcendent in the heavyweight division. And equally, you've got Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. had been obviously pegged to fight at one point a couple of years ago. There was a quasi-drugs ban. Basically, Conor Benn hasn't fought in the UK since Aaron Test that scuppered that fight on Fight Week. So there's just so much. As you said, I have such FOMO of that era because I was born in the early 90s, so I obviously missed the thrust of all of that. Kind of maybe caught the tail end of Lennox Lewis. He obviously had this slobber knocker with Vitaly Klitschko, and then he thought, okay, that's my era is done.
Yeah.
He did win, but he was like, okay, I think it's time to pass the torch here. But then the next 20 years were a little bit, barring some other actual points of interest like Ricky Hatton and Joe Calzaghe. It actually has been the last decade or so when Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua came along that then now once again you see Wembley Stadium being sold out, and they almost did. They were tipping on 100,000 there a couple of weeks ago for the Joshua Dubois fight. So boxing has this interesting, it's never going to lose its intrigue. It's always big with the hardcore fans, and it has the capacity to really hit the front and back pages in a way that most sports don't. But it'll be interesting when people are doing podcasts in 50 years' time, if that's still the case.
Yeah, well, worth a look if you have Amazon Prime. It's called Four Kings. I mean, and they're all just the most phenomenal athletes. Chris Eubank, just this coiled spring of a human being. Even when he jumps over the ropes into the ring, his body fat must be minus 1%. I mean, just
and just like
insane.
the boxer who got me into the sport when I was younger was Nassim Hamed, and again, like he's not even in this documentary, but he was such a huge figure, and again, crossover superstar. And him and Chris Eubank have a bit of a beef over who founded that ring entrance, who was the first one to jump over the ropes. It's like, actually, this footage is from before your footage.
On Four Kings, by the way, if that sounds familiar, you were just saying that's very much a homage to George Kimball's.
That's my favourite sports book anyway. For those of you who are interested in a recommendation, it's along similar lines, but it's US boxing scene. And the maybe slight quirk of difference there is all 4 of these guys fought each other. So that's Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler and Thomas Hearns. And they all at one point or another fought each other, and they were all getting significant wins, and it's such an even era. And if you're drawing up a short list of the best fighters of all time, all 4 would be on it. And the fact that they were all fighting each other, it is considered the last golden age of boxing. I think people are prisoner of the moment, and they tend to speak in reverential terms about the era that they lived in. But I think George Kimball was fair enough with that tagline. It was an extraordinary era.
Hands of Stone, Roberto Duran. Where in terms of this documentary, we spoke to Gunther about Drive to Survive. Where does this sort of rank in terms of viewership for somebody who's not a big boxing aficionado?
As in,
could I just drop into this now and really enjoy it? Like the Michael Jordan The Last Dance, people would just enjoy that.
You don't know. In fact, it might even be beneficial if you don't know a thing.
Okay.
Yeah, plug right in. Yeah.
I'm in.
I think it'll suit everybody, because even if you're right into it, it'll be so wonderfully nostalgic, and you'll just be seeing footage you haven't seen before. And even to hear the guys currently talking about things, there's a freshness to it. But if you just didn't follow boxing at all, it's instantly interesting. Yeah, it's good. It's good. I'd give it a look. So that's Four Kings on Amazon. That's not a paid advertisement, by the way. I was watching something good last night and I thought, I'll mention that tomorrow. Emails to finish up. So we were talking about Match of the Day and the Humble Highlights show on not the Monday panel. And Daniel McGowan emailed in to say, hello, Joe and team. New listener from Scotland. Interesting discussion on Monday's show around sport, highlight package shows and their future. You may have missed it, but the BBC has picked up the Champions League highlights in the UK and they have rejigged the format, which is better than what Match of the Day on a Saturday offers. Mixture of extended highlights, short clips and borrowing some of Monday Night Football's tactical analysis and somehow managing to squeeze all the matches from Tuesday and Wednesday plus into an 80-minute slot. But it doesn't feel rushed. God, it sounds all too good to be true. Also, he says they have a punditry mix of ex-pros and journalists, which is fairly novel in terms of football programming in the UK, works much better. Might be a way forward to combine the best of Match of the Day and Monday Night Football and preserve the terrestrial highlights package, says Daniel McGowan. Daniel, thanks for the email. I'd seen BBC had it, actually, and I suppose I just hadn't bothered to watch it because you're so Champions Leagued out by the end of a Champions League night anyway, and they show you the goals from around the grounds as part of their coverage, so I kind of left it. But I'll have a look. I think particularly in Champions League, journalists on with ex-pros really work because the ex-pros, they can't be expected to know the ins and outs of RB Salzburg or RB Leipzig. So if you have a journalist on who covers that kind of end of things, it's helpful. But I'll have a look. Anyone seen it?
Yeah, I did see a little bit of it, and hopefully not stepping on the toes of a conversation you already had, but they really have repurposed it in a totally different way. Like they've taken this opportunity to have an existing brand, but come at it from a different angle. And I remember when the Saturday game was launched over here, and I was kind of thinking, because there's fewer games, they might have a better chance to really have a different perspective on it, or just take a different tack, have a tactics board or something. In the end, they seemed to just change the seating arrangements and then did the Sunday game on Saturday. So the fact that Match of the Day could have just called it something totally different and made it something different, but the fact that they're trying to branch that brand out a little bit is
it better?
promising.
Is it good?
I just kind of hit on the points that the emailer said. I think it's very noticeable that the journalists are on. They hone in on things they wouldn't do typically on Match of the Day. Like it's not just great centre forward play from striker X. It's like, the significance of this result in the perspective of the winning team and their form line coming in here, which most viewers coming in probably wouldn't know from your average Champions League team. So it bodes well, and just highlights more generally, I think Shane outside would know in terms of NFL. I've always thought they've huge ownership of what they put out there, and even though they run everything through their social channels, they're kind of encouraging other people to take that footage and run with it. I always notice, like when Premier League football is on, you might notice a clip on Twitter and it's like a piece of skill or like a goal, and then within minutes it's taken down. So you're like going to show to someone and like where they're, unless it's on the official Premier League channels, you're not allowed to look at that. Whereas the NFL have full ownership, they distribute it within minutes of it happening. They do that service for you. Whereas I just think maybe other streaming outlets are maybe more too protective of it, and the sporting outlets, I know they have to value their sponsorships and who they give their broadcast rights to, but at the end of the day they're trying to promote their game. They should get it out there as much as possible.
Free publicity, isn't it? Last one. Hi lads, last evening I heard you read an email from a truck driver regarding the volume level of your voice and other contributors. He explained precisely my experience. I thought it was just myself. I hope you can improve this issue, as certainly it would encourage me to listen more to your podcast, says Eddie Houlihan. Eddie, thanks for the email. A couple of people did email in to say truck drivers not alone, not imagining things. It's definitely something to do with settings in your car. Like in my car, it's perfect the whole time, and in my headphones, perfect the whole time. So maybe certain cars, and it's an affliction. However, Paul outside has worked a little bit of magic, he thinks, which should negate any potential issues. So as of yesterday, and very much including right now, hopefully that's the problem fixed. So Eddie, let us know. Our truck driver friend from yesterday, let us know. Have we resolved that in the last 24 hours? We're kind of hoping we have. So that'd be good. Fellas, we're going to say our goodbyes. That was a little just casual chat. Not much more to it. Yeah. We have Gunter Steiner on the way. He'll be in your podcast feed very shortly tomorrow. Happy to say Rory O'Connor in studio and Owen Redden with us to look ahead to Leinster, Munster and chat all things rugby. Owen Redden, I would say just about the one of the best rugby brains in the business. So we're thrilled he's going to be part of the coverage. So Owen Redden and Rory O'Connor tomorrow on the podcast. Indosport podcast at independent.ie if you want to email us. Thanks very much.